I am in Boston, well, Boston Harbor actually. Well, on, not in Boston Harbor. That'd be bad. I'm on Boston Harbor, but anyway, I'm here in Boston at the harbor, and I've I've just been thinking a lot. Been walking around the city. I just went through the Boston Tea Party Museum yesterday, and just enjoying it. And I had thoughts that were really moving to me, and I guess I'm wanted to document them partially for my future self, but also for anyone that might find value in them. So, I'm standing right here because right there, beneath that brick building in the water right there is the real location of where the Boston Tea Party occurred. Um, so it's not that glamorous right now. There's not really any plaque or anything there that talks about, but it's here. The water's still there, and obviously, while there's nothing there, there was this actually quite nice little museum over there. You can see behind my shoulder, and it was really great. The people there were so nice and very helpful. They answered all my questions, and I had many. And they had the two. There's one ship there. There's the other one over there. One-to-one scale models of the ship that was at the location of the incident of the Boston Tea Party, and it was really quite good. They had lots of pictures, and they had lots of writings and names and just lots of information, but they also had actual tea from the Tea Party, and they also had a real case, a historical case from the party. I guess that someone found some remnants of that immediately after the event, and kept it all those years, 2.5 centuries now, and they're kept safe there. But I've had a lot of thoughts in reflection of that, and reflection of what this place means, what it means to me, what it means to the future, what it means to America, what it means to Bitcoin. And really the first thing that has struck me is just the fascination and the amazing reality of how different the world is 250 years later. I mean, those ships would go across the Atlantic, and they're like tiny. They're like these little wooden boats. And well, that alone, to go on one of those and to feel that, I was like, I do not want to go across the ocean in this thing for 3 months, or however long it took, months. But that's well, we don't know, weeks I mean. But anyway, so just the size of the ships is fascinating. The reality that it was 90,000 or 92,000 pounds of tea that was dumped into the harbor right here. It's funny because that was enough of a revolutionary insult to the British Crown and to Parliament to, eventually lead to the war. It's like 90,000 pounds of tea. Like, yeah, that's a lot, and I'm sure it's a lot of money if you laid it out in front of me. But like, that's not enough to start a war today. And yet, tea was so valuable back then that's exactly what happened. Today, it's so inexpensive and so commonplace that there's no way at which that would happen, and yet that's exactly what happened then. And likewise, not only was the tea valuable, but the military guarding it, I mean, by that day's standards, it was incredibly robust. At the end of the harbor, just down that way, there were 3 British warships the night of the Tea Party, and 3 British warships with roughly 100 cannons. There's nothing to sneeze at. They could definitely kill me standing here. But it's just amazing to think that was the height of military technology back then, just a couple hundred years ago. And then not only thinking backwards from my point of view, but also if I was one of those colonists standing right here or right on the shore here, and I could magically time travel forwards 250 years to today, I think they would really have trouble, like, just taking in all the changes here, all these massive buildings, and the highway behind me with the cars going on at me, filming on my little cell phone here. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine seeing buildings this big with glass and the number of people and the diversity of people, and it's anyway, I've made my point. It's just amazing to think about how different things are, and how today what is such a small amount of resources was so valuable to them. It's what they went to war over. And I wonder if in the same way today we go to war over oil and resources of today, that in 100 years, 200 years will just seem trivial. Like, really? That's what they went to war over? That was the inciting incident? Like, okay. So, anyway, that's something that's been a fascination to me. But the thing that's been of even more fascination to me is the irony of this location. So obviously right there is like the birthplace of, what would eventually become the United States. But behind me, literally across the street from the museum, is that building right there. Let's see if I can get it. That one right there, that's ominously hiding in the clouds behind this big glass one here. That's the Federal Reserve of Boston. One of the branches of the Federal Reserve here in the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank. And that is so ironic to me. I almost couldn't believe it when on the tour they said that, because it's so... what is the Boston Tea Party? Essentially, it is the pivotal moment, or a pivotal moment, that was a result of the British Empire, the British Crown. It's a result of Britain distorting their money. Britain went to war. They had, the Indian War, the 7 Years' War. They're fighting all these wars, decade after decade after decade, and they're continuing to corrupt the ledger so they can be able to print these dollars and then pass them off to parts of the world. Basically rob via printing money, via taxation, via inflation. All these colonies, including the American colonists here. And so the Boston Tea Party is essentially just another one of these events in history where an empire is cycling over in its dominance and in its influence. If you look at pretty much every historical event similar to this, look at the French Revolution, you look at 30 Years' War, you look at all the, you just look at all the historical examples of war and conflict, even, last major war, World War II. It's inflation and debasement, and money is either the inciting incident or the cause behind the conflict, or it aids in the anger of the conflict. And the Boston Tea Party is no different. We, had enough of British rule and threw the tea in the harbor here because we wanted a reset. We had a political layer on top of our resource allocation that was distorting distorting where those resources were going and distorting that allocation via theft, because inflation is theft. It's inherently theft. And they were distorting reality, and eventually we said enough, and so we flipped the table. We said enough, we're done. And so the irony and the point I want to make there is that ultimately the problem is not an us versus them issue. It's not that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. It's not that, I am any better than anyone else, or that I am any more moral than anyone else. We all have this problem. We all want something for free. We all want something for nothing. We all don't want to put in the work. We all have greed. We all have corruption. None of us reaches perfection. We all fall short, and morally. And that's the irony here, is that literally we have this very meaningful spot where we wanted a reset, and we wanted to start over, and we wanted to do our own thing, and yet right there we just erected a new version. We said enough with British rule, enough with King George thousands of miles that way, and instead we just brought it to where it's thousands of feet away. It's anyway, the irony is lost on a lot of people, I think, but it's not lost on me, and it's in our action of wanting to avoid this issue that in major part is a symptom of a monetary problem. We just brought it across the ocean and we put it across the street. It's like anyway, but point being that, instead of thinking about the past, if we think about the future, even if we burnt down the Fed right there, even if we destroyed that building, and we would just build a new one. We'd build a new one, and then a new one after that, again and again and again. It doesn't matter who's in charge, what empire we have, or where we are in history. We'll just build another one. We'll have enough of the one we're currently in. We'll tear everything down. Resources get reallocated accordingly to where they rightfully go. And then we'll just build a new system on top of it that distorts reality, corrupts the ledger, and then, again and again and again. It's this cycle of technological innovation. Society prospers, it grows and grows and grows. It grows enough that people think they can get stuff for free, they begin corrupting the ledger, and then things begin to decline, and then they decline in a feedback loop, continually getting worse and worse and worse. The money gets worse. As the money gets worse, people have less trust. As people have less trust in society, trust in authorities, trust in the technologies working in the future go down, innovation goes down, competitors rise up and begin their own curves. It just, and so point being that it's not that building is the problem. It's not King George that was the problem. It's not an us versus them issue. It's a human nature issue. It's us versus us. And that's the whole point. We can't fix it. It doesn't matter if it's a monarch or a democracy. It doesn't matter if it's a communist nation or a dictatorship or an oligarchy. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. At the end of the day, you can't have humans wiggle their way into trying to solve a mathematical problem better than the math itself can just do it. And so that's the irony here, is that what the Boston Tea Party folks were fighting for, and ultimately they succeeded in their immediate goal, but long term it's not been the ultimate solution. And so it's not just the irony that the Fed is here at the very location at which people were wanting to build a system that didn't have a Fed, but it's also the irony that their mission, and the short term, while it succeeded, and it's succeeded for the last 250 years, more or less, it's not really succeeded in the long run. And I guess a point of that is that my new friend that I went on this tour with, he was a veteran, is a veteran, and when he was over in the Middle East, he told me that there were things that he was commanded to do, and he saw things that really called his patriotism into question. And when we were in this tour, he said something to me. America. He said something to me that was really profound. Basically, that it meant a lot to him being here. And he said that the problem with this American exploitation of others, the problem is not the ideas and the ideals of here, of the water, but over there. And I thought that was really profound, that it's not, that America is built upon the ideas of freedom and equality and the ability of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and not built on the ideals of centralization and corruption and distortion and manipulation. And that was really profound to me, and it meant a lot to him. It gives more hope for the future of America and for the hope of liberty. And obviously Bitcoin is what we believe that is. In the same way that the colonists were discussing the events that would unfold here and discussing the future of liberty, Sons of Liberty, Daughters of Liberty, what did they do? They met in homes, and they met in bars and restaurants and local places where they could meet, and they would discuss what the threats would be. They would discuss what they would find. And so that's a beautiful thing that they were meeting in secret, meeting in homes and bars, discussing freedom, what a nation built in liberty could look like. And I wonder if they could time travel. Not just would they be amazed by the technology, from light bulbs to glass buildings to just, they wouldn't just be amazed by the technology, but I think they'd be amazed by the beauty of this place, by the beauty of Boston. I have met a few people here and hung out with folks and seen so much diversity. It's really meaningful, and it's really wonderful. There's a children's museum over there, and all the kids are playing in that park, laughing like all day. And people have smiles on their faces with big ice cream cones. And well, not today. It's a little gloomier today, but last couple days it's been really sunny and warm, and it's just been nice. And in the same way, Bitcoiners are meeting in homes, they're meeting in cafes, they're meeting in bars, and they're discussing what the future could look like, discussing what future of liberty is, future of society. And that's really, in a very similar way, what the colonists were doing. And so, I find that really, really meaningful. And, you know, what if Bitcoin is a technology that is able to transcend the Boston Tea Party to a certain extent? You know, what if this lineage, this history, this repetition of rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall of political and technological regimes, in large part due to corruption of politics and corruption of society, which is compounded by the corruption of money. What if for the first time we have something that negates the need for Boston Tea Party events? What if this place, this location, this museum, and this water here, what if it's not just meaningful because of what it means for America, but what if it's meaningful because it's the end, more or less? It's one of the last moments in history where people had to topple it over via bloodshed. I find that really impactful and really moving, you know, because if I think about the future and technology's just getting faster, society's just getting faster, and this rise and fall, I don't see any way at which we can stop it. Humans will never change. You know, it doesn't matter if we're dealing with warships and cannons and a king thousands of miles away and ships that large and 90,000 pounds of tea, or it doesn't matter if we're dealing with modern skyscrapers. At the end of the day, humans are the same. This building is the same. Our technology is mind-blowing, and yet we still have this problem. And so in the future, I'm sure of it, that we would just continue to have this problem. And so what if Bitcoin is that which has the potential to give a path forward in the future that doesn't have this pessimistic view? How many lives is that? You know, if we assume human population continues to grow as it has in every iteration of time throughout human history, then we can conclude that the wars of the future would have death tolls far larger and far more devastating than the wars and revolutions of the past. We have to assume that the tyrannies and the authoritarian regimes and the dictatorships and the censorships and the conflicts of the future would have to be worse than the past, both in terms of the degree of power that centralized entities would have, as well as the sheer numbers, sheer quantity of people. That's our assumption. If we assume that corrupting the money, which corrupts the society, and corrupts society, corrupts the money, you know, in that feedback loop, if we assume that that's inevitable, as long as humans are able to distort money from reality, as long as humans have political systems built atop of resource allocations, you know, as long as we assume that, and we assume human population continues to grow, then the majority of suffering is ahead of us. Unless we can find a way to achieve what the Boston Tea Party was out to achieve without violence, without bloodshed. And that's the beautiful thing that Bitcoin represents to me. That's the beautiful thing that this place represents to me. And it's why the tour is quite emotional for me. And, yeah. In the same way that the colonists were gathering and debating between each other what the threats are, where the weak points are, what the choke points are, or were, 250 years later, the Bitcoiners are doing the same thing. We're debating with each other, discussing with each other constantly. People have trouble understanding how is it that you can wake up and go. I mean, when I've been here in Boston, in the days before, it's like, I've had like 18 or 20-hour days of just get up, start meeting people, start networking with people, start talking about Bitcoin immediately. And it's so hard to explain to folks, because it might seem like that we're just like trying to look, we'll be so rich, blah blah blah, and even if that's part of it, the vast majority of the time we're just debating with each other, arguing in a friendly way of what we think weaknesses are, choke points are, dangers to the network, because ultimately we all want the maximum probability of survival and the minimum probability of failure. And so that's just what we spend so much time talking about. And the exciting thing, the encouraging thing, is that, at least for me, the more I look, the more optimistic it seems. You know, the Chinese Communist Party's failed, the Taliban's failed, Vladimir Putin's failed, the New York Times on their fearful articles has failed, mainstream media has failed. You know, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have failed in their media campaigns and statements against it. And yet, no matter what, the fundamental beauty of a finite amount and pricing and taking an infinite amount of resources and pricing in that infinite amount, ultimately, it's so far 14 years been exactly what we would hope. Everything, all the threats and risks that we can think of are being negated, and that's a very encouraging thing for me. It's a very encouraging thing for the future. And yeah, it's really meaningful. And there were a lot of names in the museum, and one of the things that struck me when I was in there was, you know, I'm one of those people. You know, there's roughly 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, whatever, Bitcoiners today, and it's like, you know, my name is just like the names in that museum. I'm one of those people, like those colonists, fighting for this idea, just like, and that's part of what's so exciting about meeting fellow Bitcoiners in real life. It's like you're meeting people that like have the same vision and are thinking about the future and understand that the majority of progress is ahead of us, and understand where we've come from and are working towards that together. Like that's the exciting thing. But you know, it's like you're meeting your fellow colonists, you're meeting your fellow people in real life. You're no longer reading the books, you're seeing them. And even though it's exciting, even though it makes you feel special to a certain extent that you're this early and that you're figuring it out, at the end of the day, you know, I'll be forgotten, as those names in there have been all but forgotten. And that's not to, you know, put them down, that's just to say the truth. How many people out here or even watching this, how many of you could list the 50 or 80 names or 100 names or 1,000 people, however many people you want to go out to? I mean, the vast majority of people that made the revolution happen are no longer remembered in common vernacular or in our common memories. And in the same way, in 100 years, you know, I probably will not be remembered. You know, maybe a little, hopefully, but you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. I don't think it does. But that's something people outside of Bitcoin, I think, don't really understand, is that I'm committed to this thing, and the people that I met, we're all committed to this thing. We spend, you know, 15 hours, or like for me, I've spent 15, 18, 20-hour days, you know, thinking about this, talking about it with people, and it's not about me, it's not about any of us individually. It's anyway, I made my point that I think about the conflicts of the future if centralization continues, and if resource allocation, resource misdistribution continues. It's a lot of people. Ukraine's not the end of it. This building, this Fed, which again is so ominous. it's so it's so ironic, but anyway, it's not about the building, it's about the people. It's about life. Feel that connection to a certain extent, connection to the past, connection to this moment, and like I said, a realization that hopefully this museum is a museum not just of the beginnings of American history, but the end of the necessity for violence and the necessity for fighting centralization via armed conflict. I guess to conclude is just to say that I'm pleasantly surprised by how much this location has meant to me here at the harbor. It's very insightful into the past, and for me it's a very good reminder that if we assume humanity continues and our population continues to grow and that we continue to innovate and discover new things, it's inevitable that we'll continue to just build these centralized choke points. And if that's the case, it's inevitable that they distort resource allocation and distort reality again and again and again, which ultimately is distorting freedom and distorting life and distorting truth and distorting information. And you can't fix that permanently via violent revolutions. You have to find a way to invent something that can negate that. And if we don't, there's a lot of difficulty and a lot of suffering ahead for us, and even more ahead for future generations after us. And so I hope that the harbor here is a location of one of the last beginnings of one of the last revolutions of this sort in human history. And I hope this building here across the street from the harbor is one of the last, if not the last, remaining artifacts of this ancient monetary practice. Not just for making money for me, and not just for the enjoyment of thinking about the future, but also for the incredible number of human lives that are directly and indirectly at stake. So, onwards.